those of you who can watch this later. Like I said, if you don't mind just muting for now, we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. And we'll go ahead and just wait 1 minute while everyone loads in from the meeting room. My name's Tamsin Gilbert. I'm Research Network producer with Common Ground Research Networks, and we are here today for the Meet the Author for the book, The Case Against Disclosure. We'll get started in just 1 minute. I'll let everyone make their way in. I can see. We'll wait. All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to the Meet the Author for the book, The Case Against Disclosure, Defending Creative Autonomy in the Age of AI. We've got our two authors here today. Dr. James Hudson is Chair of Human-Centered AI Programs at Lindenwood University and leads the AI Ambassadors. He holds PhDs in Artificial Intelligence and Art History, along with a master's degrees in Leadership and Game Design. We also have Dr. Daniel Platt, a leading scholar in the field of educational technology, who centers his research and teaching on the integration of generative artificial intelligence into pedagogical practice. I think I need another coffee to read that again. I'd like to welcome you both today. And with that, what I'll do is I'll hand it over to you to tell us a little bit more about the book, and then we'll open it up for questions after that.
Thank you so much. I'll let Dr. Platt start.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much to everyone who's here and to Common Ground. So I'll just give an initial statement about why this book is here and what we were wanting to do, and talk about a few aspects of it, and then I'll hand it over to my co-author. So there have been a lot of debates that have emerged really quickly around the AI since ChatGPT put it on everyone's radar. And questions about environmentalism recently, questions about job loss. There are lots and lots of questions. But one question we've noticed has really not been debated. And that's the question of whether it's important to know whether something is AI or human. So it just seems to be an assumption. In Dr. Hudson and I work in policy development as well as content creation and writing. And it's just a kind of assumption by many, many, many people that, well, we need to know for sure, is something human or not? And so we decided to push on that assumption, and it's a kind of experimental argument. Let's try make the argument that there should be a default position that you are not required to disclose, whether you've used AI for something you've been creating. And this is emerging at a time. It's pretty common when new technology shows up, that there's a kind of stage of alarmism about a new technology, worries about what it's going to do, and the debates are immediately quite acute. And then gradually we move into a later stage where the technology is just sort of part of what we're doing. James, you can advance it. So our central claim is that creators should maintain ownership over the method that they use to create whatever they do. If they create art, they should be able to decide if they want to say, I use this tool, I use that tool, I didn't use any tool. And then the publishers have ownership over how that work is given to others. But that it's really important to have a default position, that if you're a writer, for example, whatever you do in order to create your writing should be part of your own intellectual property. Now, there's some exceptions where outright theft, outright plagiarism, we need to allow that. But when it comes to just tool use, and we put AI within tool use, the creator is the one who should decide whether to disclose that or not. But in publisher policies, in university policies, and just sort of social media conversations, the assumption tends to be, in just public discourse, that the author is required to tell the public. here, I wrote this by myself, or I wrote this with the help of an AI, or an AI generated it completely. In fact, I just noticed today, Andrew Cuomo has a new ad that was just came out, and at the bottom it acknowledges that AI was made, AI was used in the creation of the ad. So there is a kind of social pressure to let the public know if something was made with AI or not. And we believe that that's a seriously problematic to make that the default expectation in advance. So partly this is just a technological issue that we know as technologies show up that there's a lot of suspicion around those technologies. So when calculators first showed up, there was a lot of debate on what will it do to our students' ability to do calculations if they can just use this device. And I, as a writing professor, am noticing this is pretty much a default among my colleagues also, a lot of anxiety about what will happen if we don't know how something was made. And so in policies, we say students must say how they made something, authors must say how they made something. And we believe this comes too much from anxiety as opposed to a careful thinking through of what we actually want policy and defaults to be. So next one, James. To me, so I teach creative writing, I teach some applied AI, I teach composition, I teach literature. And to me, this is the most interesting argument. If you just think about the one that's on the presentation right now. So in a lot of these debates about whether we should disclose or not, whether AI was used, there's a prior assumption about how cognition actually works. And the assumption is that we know where our thoughts come from. And we know which thoughts are ours, which thoughts are someone else's, which thoughts come from a tool. I believe we don't know. I believe that even if we're working by ourselves, sort of in a space, trying to write word by word, there's a kind of mystery as to whether these ideas emerge from ourselves, if they emerge from something we've read, if they emerge from conversation, if the technology that we're using to create something is partially responsible for what we end up authoring. And so the simple act of saying we need to disclose whether something is purely human or hybrid AI human assumes a really simple view of cognition that it's possible to say that. And we just actually don't think it is possible to say that. I think it's very likely that if we, and what we're really, really worried about. So if you look at the guidance that's come out of the US Copyright Office, it is allowing increasingly, there are signals coming out that the US Copyright Office will allow copyright for things that are generated in part with AI. But what they want is a clear, what we're calling here, an audit trail. So in order to say something was made with creative input by the human, you have to very painstakingly show this came from there, this part of the image came from the AI, this part was made by, and we imagine a future where authors are expected to say this word in a sentence came from an AI, this phrase came from AI, but this one came from my mind, this one came, and it's just actually not possible. Like you would literally have to say, these 3 sentences came from a conversation I had. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the novella, Stevenson said it came to him in a dream. So should he clarify which parts came from his dream and which parts came from the revision process and which parts came from the editor? Like, it seems to open up such a can of worms that it's just not pragmatic. It's not practical to do it. Okay, next one. A second argument we've explained in the book is we think that we've got a kind of period that comes out of a romantic idea of authorship, that the solitary genius is the one that produces work. And I think it's quite clear that actually the way work is created is much more collaborative than that. So Dr. Hudson and I have done quite a lot of writing together, and I don't think we could actually say which parts of our books are from my mind and which parts are from his mind and which parts are we and real work actually is more like that, as opposed to a single person sitting down intentionally choosing every word or intentionally choosing every part of an image or every brushstroke. And that collaboration needs to be acknowledged and should be part of the debate. Okay, next one. And then this is, actually, you can take over here, James, and then I'll jump in later.
Thank you. Yeah, as Dr. Plate was mentioning, there are many things that don't reflect the realities of publishing, of copyright, of creativity, nor the history of creativity, art, and literature. What I want to kind of bring to everyone's attention here, if you're not familiar with it, this is the first work of art that was granted copyright by the U.S. Copyright Office. It was painstakingly documented with over 30 steps of changes, almost satirically, almost as though they were being sarcastic when they were doing this. But this is placing the documentation of the creative process above the actual creative process and the final object, which we can talk about is not historically valid. But here, what the U.S. Copyright Office wants is a clear disclosure of significant human intervention in the creative process. This example I love giving in the arguments because of the over 30 changes that were made after this image was generated by AI. All the creative did here was dictate to the AI what to make changes, right? Not intervening themselves. So again, the changes are inherently conceptual, not material. So this is really important to kind of distinguish, right? As far as the idea is going to be driving creativity moving forward, not execution. And we've been moving that way for quite some time, as we can discuss. But I also want to point out that the main argument of the book is about creativity and about the process of coming up with creative ideas, but we should also note there's a great deal of inconsistency among publishers in the process. As Dr. Plate noted, creativity and the creation of, say, a book itself has never been solitary, right? So what do? You send a book proposal out, you get feedback from reviewers, you revise it based on that feedback, you go back and write it, you send it out, you get feedback from your editor, you revise it based on that feedback, you send it back out. So there are always these changes, and we always had a second set of eyes dictating and changing and massaging what was happening. But even more so, if you look at scientific publishers and those on the humanities side, they differ radically when it comes to the requirements of the disclosure and where AI can be used. Interestingly enough, if we're dealing largely with non-native English-speaking areas in science journals, they're perfectly fine and often require the use of things like Grammarly or AI for English editing purposes. But they want them to do the math themselves, right? The opposite is true in social science and humanities journals, in which you have to write the literature review yourself, but then other things that are not the hold on. We'll be there in a minute. Are not the general focus of that discipline. So, but if you go on right now and try to publish on Amazon for Kindle Direct Publishing, for instance, you have three options, right? That being, was AI used to generate all of the content? Was it used to just edit some of the content? Or was it not used at all, right? So that kind of stoplight approach is still used in education, but it doesn't reflect the realities. How do we know if someone just used it to change the grammar or syntax in their argument and it didn't give them a new idea associated with it? It's impossible to know and to parse those things apart. So number one, that is, of course, not really liable. But secondly, this overlooks the majority of IP in the 20th century and a lot of the cases that came about associated with creativity. I give you here, as far as the U.S. Copyright Office is concerned, this differentiation between trade dress and style is often discussed in these court cases. So here, Sherry Levine is going to take a series of photographs of this very famous, right, Depression era photographer. So it literally is taking a picture of a picture, right? And this was granted copyright because of the transformative aspect of it introducing a new perspective, not the material translation or modification of it. So this is one of those specific examples that goes back to Duchamp, as we were mentioning, that being once you're able to copyright a urinal that you bought at a hardware store, right, because it's the concept that matters and not the execution, then we entered an entirely new era, and that's 1917. But what really is happening, what we've seen and we've confirmed now with several lawyers working on cases with the U.S. Copyright Office, that it's about institutional authority and the ability to control what is being granted, what processes are appropriate, what creators can use and what they can't use. And what they're afraid of is a flood of additional work, additional copyright. The way in which they have it set up right now, if you read it verbatim, it's a case-by-case basis, which means that everyone would have to submit all these versions of their Word documents or files or all their saved JPEGs or all their sketches, right, etc., and then submit that whole folder for a few people to review, which is impossible. You can't go through these line by line. So the rule itself is it can't be enforced. But it's about the institutions we put in place which decide what information gets out, how we're processing that information, and how that information is vetted and controlled. So this is another thing that we really need to discuss is this actually about the content and the quality of what's being put out, or is it about controlling how the information gets out and how it's produced? So the methodology is going to go through this type of argument, looking at these historical analogies beforehand, and really diving into the analysis of policy as it's being developed before our eyes, right? So part 3 is out for the U.S. Copyright Office on recommendation for generative AI. But if you read it, they're really starting to drill down on the elements associated with how data is sourced, right? Whether in part or whole, which of course is how Google Books won their lawsuit, because they're stating for authors that they're only reproducing parts or chapters of a book, not the whole book. And so we're really getting down and parsing these smaller and smaller elements instead of kind of looking at the larger picture. But the example that Dr. Plate gave was great, talking about a political advertisement. When's the last time we saw something that was real, right? Do we disclose all of our Instagram filters? Do we disclose every time Photoshop is used in an advertisement, even though we know it's in every advertisement? No, but it became common. It became well known. And so once again, just like autocorrect, just like Grammarly caused a crisis in English departments when it came out in the early 2000s, because they couldn't tell what was being written and what the ideas were of students, it eventually became normalized and now is seen as a standard tool in English departments for composition, especially for non-native English speakers. So over time, the crisis that we're seeing here will look quite pedestrian, right? It's going to be run-of-the-mill, just like having spell check in your Word document, which we should also mention all of Microsoft Office and all word processors have this integrated into them. And so it is nearly impossible to get away from these generative tools. So we also need to admit the reality that escaping them requires more effort than just writing an email and it auto-completes what you're doing. You're going to have to fight not to use the tools, right? And you already are. So we need to start thinking, okay, if this is the new norm, what do we need to actually think about now? And that is judging what the output is by its quality. Is it solid? Is it a good poem? Does it have the effective intent of the creator? I'm writing another book with our head of theater, right? And his whole point is, who cares if an AI wrote the play if the audience is affected in the way in which that was intended, right? As performed by humans, right? So in this way. So there's these distinctions that we're still making. But of course, comprehensive disclosure is completely impossible as far as the entire workflows are concerned. We're moving towards a period in which everyone will be cyborgs, because you can't write anything or create anything without a digital intermediary. right? And those intermediaries are all going to have these overlays of the natural language processing, whether it be for diffusion models or large language models or natural language processing. All of those are the interface with which we are creating from now on. So really, we should be looking at trust but verify, right? That being, wait a minute, this sounds like plagiarism, or wait a minute, this doesn't sound like it would actually work if we carried this out in a lab, right? Then test it, right, in this way. But it's impossible to go through and disclose all the steps that were taken, even within a standard journal for mathematics, right? Because they're required in many instances to run it through grammar and spell checks, right? Which in turn changes the words that are used, which in turn changes the intent, the messaging, the framing of problems in that way. So I will stop there so we can open it up for questions and stop sharing. Let's see if I can do that there.
All right, everyone. I'm just doing the same thing, opening it up. If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or write the question in the chat. I might just get started with asking a question to kick things off. So I was thinking, as you were talking about AI as a tool and how art has always been collaborative, which is a really interesting concept. And you think about the works of Jeff Koons, like he doesn't make anything himself. He has a team, you know, who are sort of unnamed and they produce these large sculptures. So, but then it's sort of looking at this idea of AI as a tool. Is it how it, in terms of, I don't know how I'm going to ask this. Do you see it more AI as more of a neutral tool, like a paintbrush, or as a collaborative tool, like as if it's one of Jeff Koons' assistants? And how do you think that if it affects this idea of disclosure?
Do you want to take that one, James?
Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Well, as always, even with how artists would create previously, I always say they would go in Google Images, they would print out previous examples. That being, I have a commission for a landscape, so I'm going to go look at Beardstadt, I'm going to look at Ansel Adams, I'm going to print those out, I'm going to paste them to the side of my canvas while I'm working, etc. And then my paintbrush then interprets right through my understanding of that. My synthesis of these various elements and what I remember of landscapes. So to answer the question, it depends on how it's used. So the way in which, if we're talking about neutral use, that's kind of the assumption when it comes to the requirements of many publishers. That being, if you're a non-native English speaker, they very often will, require it be ran through for grammatical purposes, for clarity of understanding. So if we're trying to understand that as neutral, that would be an example. However, if you can use it collaboratively in the same way, right? So you can bounce things back and forth. That being, I'm having trouble coming up with an illusion here, for this particular scenario. What type of previous examples might we draw upon in order to come up with, the effect that I'm going for? Or what example can I have when it comes to, prior examples in quantum computing and what NVIDIA is doing right now, aligning itself with OpenAI to sell their chips because they're needed for the data centers, right? So it depends on how it's used. So it could be either, but Dr. Plate has way more experience there.
It looks like someone has a hand up, so we can.
Yeah, I didn't know whether you wanted to ask something. Let's open it up to Casey, and then after that, we'll go with Tracy and then Viv.
Yeah, hi. Question. So if disclosure mandates are not the answer, what non-regulatory or alternative policy frameworks would you all propose?
Well, really what we're arguing for is a default. So I think that where the US Copyright Office is going is case by case. They really seem to be signaling we're going to make decisions about this based on it really feels like a mess to try to do something case by case, but that's where they're signaling they're going. The book is to argue for a default position, really, that our default should be that creators and authors should not have to disclose. And then everything beyond that becomes almost like negotiated based on the case by case basis. Are there particular harms you have in mind that you're
No, no, I sort of heard you talking about, shape and policy and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I have not read the book yet. So this is the first I'm sort of hearing these arguments. So thank you.
Sure. It really is. Let's just, for us, we want to push back against a default that authors and artists should just be expected to disclose and create a default where they're not, but then open the doors for lots of variety in terms of what actually happens in any particular case.
Thank you. Tracy, would you like to unmute and ask your question? I'm happy to read it as well if you
Yeah,
don't.
no, I'll give it a go. Apologies. I'm in England, obviously, so I'm a different time zone to you guys, and I'm at the back end of the day, so I'm a bit tired. What I was thinking, I mean, I do a podcast where we look at a lot of creative content that increasing amounts of which are using generative tools, and very little of it, I would say, is original. A lot of it is what we call gen slop of one sort or
Yeah.
another, and YouTube's full of that sort of crap. However, I also work with a lot of digital artists, and the digital artists, one of the issues that we face with the digital artists is what's the art? Is it the output, or is it the way that they've developed the algorithm and implemented it? And I don't really have a good answer for that. Because nobody's really bothered to pin it down over the last sort of 40, 50 years that those artists have developed that kind of sort of work. But it's definitely one of the things that's kind of coming through. But what it strikes me as being particularly relevant here is this, because I agree with you, I don't think they should have to disclose the tools that they've been using. Certainly the original digital artists from the 1960s, they did not. And now they can't even recreate what they themselves created because, the computers have moved on, the tools have moved on. You can't just use emulators and all of that kind of stuff. So the question is, with contemporary environment, how do you think replicability can be actually achieved if we're talking about disclosure not being the route? Because clearly replicability is the evidence of the audit trail that you're kind of talking about.
Interesting.
So we talk about an exactly repeatable pictorial medium, as in
Well, or something very similar.
Well, what would it
Some
prove?
aspects of it being replicable so that you've got a sense of, yeah, this is actually the process that the author used. Because if they're then demonstrating that the process is theirs, that is their, that is the way that they have developed their work and their aesthetic and what have you.
That is a very interesting point because Zerai of the Dawn was one of those landmark cases in 2023 in which the artist did receive copyright for the text, but not the imagery, but came back and showed step by step precisely how she created the imagery, which was much more difficult than writing the text. And so she demonstrated replicability of the step by step nature in which she created it. Her drawings, watercolors, training the model, using it to overlay certain stylistic elements. And so even with that, she was still denied copyright. So
yes, exactly.
I mean, but so take W.B. Yeats, so the great poet, who at least at a certain phase in his career believed he was communing with spirits and doing automatic writing that created his poems, or Henry Miller, who would sit down and say, "J'écoute," and just wait for those are not replicable. Like you can't decide how am I going to get myself in the same spiritual mindset that gives me the particular word. So I think we just want to we don't know where all of this new kind of art and writing is going to go. And it'd be wonderful to keep it open as opposed to required.
But it is one of the things, isn't it, that's sort of commented on about the use of these models, that there should be some element of replicability because it's mathematical in what it does.
Yeah, but then also
quite stochastic. Yeah, go ahead, James.
No, I was going to say to your point, Tracy, that I think there's a public misunderstanding, and that in academia as well, is that the tools just automatically create things themselves, right? So like an entire book, an entire painting, right? An entire, 3D model, et cetera, which is not the case, right? So if that were the case, you would have others writing entire books, right, with the tools, but you need to have a bit of skill. You need to know what that looks like. In the same way, I have someone working on a video for us, and he's showing his students like, okay, try to get someone typing on writing once again and have it turn into a typewriter, right? So, and they worked for 3 hours and couldn't do it, right, in this way. So I think the assumption is that it doesn't take skill or understanding the tools to get high quality content out of what we're doing. So that's number one. Is it getting better and better? Yes. But as you mentioned, there's so much, quote unquote AI slop because people don't know how to use it. They're just taking the initial output and not iteratively working with it, adding their own experience, their own talents, their own skill set to it. So I think that's probably a differentiator. But again, you wouldn't give copyright or pay $20,000 for one of these automatically generated videos from Sora with someone holding a kitten in their hand, right? So it's not it's a non-starter. It's in a different realm of our understanding of creativity and fine art or poetry, etc. So just kind of clarify the differentiation there, and that's kind of the major point of judge the final product. Is it useful? Is it good? Is it accurate? Is it adding to the conversation in a given field? Is it innovative? Does it move us forward in the field? If not, who cares, right? So we're not going to mess with it anyway. If it does, okay, well then that has value.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. I won't keep you any longer because I'm sure others have got questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Our next question is Viv. Viv, did you want to unmute to ask your question, or I can read on your behalf if you like?
Let me unmute it. You're talking at a level way beyond me, so it may be irrelevant, but here's a case study. Utilizing a Creative Commons approach with a concept of freedom of knowledge and rapid transfer of knowledge, I designed a degree, an MA in Transformational Urban Leadership, which I've implemented in 8 different seminaries around the world, training people among the poor. We've got about 60 course designers who've input. Each school develops it slightly differently, maybe 80% the same, but we have a common understandings. It appears that this can't be copyrighted. You can't copyright a program from what I've researched, but that leaves it open to all sorts of claims as to who owns the program. So far, we've been fine, but why would AI not claim that it wrote the program at some point and hence take control of the whole process, and Creative Commons that no longer would apply?
Is the question where we're moving with the direction of Creative Commons? It was actually one of our recommendations 3 years ago was a compromise, instead of a full copyright, a sort of Creative Commons, 4.0 kind of understanding of like directly AI generated content without human intervention, such as like Stephen Thaler was kind of recommending with his creativity machine, right? That generated things out of nothing itself. But are you asking ways in which to copyright it, or where you think it's moving in the future?
Yeah, I'm asking, how do you protect it from AI if we use AI?
Oh, no. Yeah, there is no need to protect from AI in this way. There is a major misconception among, especially Dr. Plate's colleagues, that whatever you put in, immediately you lose IP for or copyright to, as it gets subsumed somehow into this, nebulous thing that now owns it, which is not the case, right? So that being AI as of the moment, and that was the point of the lawsuit that Thaler had in his instance with his creativity machine, is that AI cannot own copyright itself, which is one of the reasons why in 2023 major publishers stated you cannot name ChatGPT as a co-author, because then it would have rights, right? It would have ownership, it would have IP. So so you need not worry about AI. You should worry about someone else taking it and then copywriting it, right, and claiming it as their own. That's a real worry, but AI is not the worry. Humans would be the worry there.
Okay.
Thanks, Viv. Does that answer your question?
That does answer the specific question.
There's huge
Unanswered questions in there, but that's yeah.
We have time for another question or two if you want to write your name or your question in the chat while we wait to see if anyone wants to ask anything else. Oh, Dora, did you have a question? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I would love to ask a question, and I have not written it, so it may be a little bit scatterbrained, and I came late, so I'm sorry that I may be missing something from your presentation, but this is an argument I have been trying to make for quite some time, so it really resonates with me, and I am in academia. We often talk about it. I'm in an AI committee. What's happening here with people's work, are students writing by themselves, and like as long as they're writing good stuff, and as long as we actually create this, process where we write, annotations on their work, and we actually explain to them where they might be wrong. I think that the problem is not whether they use AI or not, but at the same time, did you work with authors, creatives in your work? Because it sounds to me like this is also intensifying quite a lot of the labor that we need to do in order to communicate our work and publish. And that's one of my main concerns at this point, besides, the ethics of it, that we do not have enough time in academia to produce work, let alone create 200-page indices of, the kind of work that we have done. So
are you saying the disclosure requirements would add additional work beyond the creation of something? You'd have to document how it was created. Yeah, that's one of our primary concerns in the book. Yeah, that we double or triple the amount of work that's involved in doing any kind of creative work.
Yeah. So that was, you already had answered my question, but I missed it because I was late.
I teach composition, so at a freshman level, a similar thing applies, where if you teach a student how to write something well with AI, you can see quite quickly the students who just don't know how to do it very well. They use AI and it's just not very good. And then other students who use AI and actually create really interesting work. But if you add on top of that and now write a 10-page document painstakingly showing how you did everything, it just sucks the life out of the student. Like, why do I have to do all this additional work when I've done the work? Like, I've communicated what I wanted to communicate. So yeah,
exactly.
agree.
I'm in a teacher education program and an elementary teacher education program. So we teach teachers, and the concern here is also, you have to know how to write in order to actually produce the good prompts. But I think that even that is kind of changing. And for me too, Tamsin is here. They have given me my first editing jobs. The question is not so much about learning to write by writing, it's learning to write by reading. And we need to start shifting our focus. So I really appreciate that you have written the book, and I will be getting it. So thank you.
Thank you.
A really good point. Thank you, Dora.
I think we have another question in the chat here. It's your name to pronounce Irima? Irima? Forgive me if I've mispronounced, Ori. If I've mispronounced your name, I can read your question, or you can unmute if you'd like to ask your question.
That's all right. Go ahead and read it.
Oh, okay. It says, how will issues of...
from Nigeria.
Hi, sorry. How will issues of ownership be resolved in a situation where different authors use AI translated materials that are similar? Will the ownership depend on who was first, etc.? And if so, will that be fair or just?
So is the question that you're writing a translation of something and publishing it? And if so, then just like today, it wouldn't matter either way because scholars publish on the exact same topic their entire lives since grad school. So, so you don't just have one translation, right, of Plato or Aristotle. You have 12 translations, right, in this way. So, so someone publishing before you wouldn't negate you being able to publish, right, something, because two people using the same AI, right, will have different outputs, right, in this way. So they will be unique, depending upon how you're using it and your strategy, your organization, your editing style, etc. So it will be different anyway, right? So the question is, do both add value to the field in some way? That's kind of the real question. But from a copyright standpoint, you can copyright them both.
Does that answer your question? Are there any other questions? I mean, I have a lot of questions, but maybe I don't want to just hit everyone with my questions. Tracy, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I've got another little, well, I've got like you, I've got loads and loads of questions on it. It's great to have a chance to have a chat about this. I mean, I also sit on review panels for grant funds here in the UK. And one of the things that we're asked not to do is obviously use generative tools to evaluate grants that we're looking at. Now, clearly, generative tools have been used in the development of the grants. We're getting to the point when it's a really, really fine line, and I wonder what your experience and views are of this, as to what exactly disclosure in terms of tools being used means. Because if I search for something on Google, that too is now using generative tools. So I can't say, oh no, I didn't do a Google search.
Yeah,
but if I don't use those tools, then I'm not the expert that is there to actually be able to evaluate the grant. So
yeah, no, it's the exact, and I know exactly what you're talking about because they send me grants all the time to review as well on EU, UNESCO, etc. And so, in some, I mean, just like different publishers, some will say, I did not use generative AI or upload this because the assumption by authors and or Elsevier, I was talking to one of their reps last week, is that if they upload it, then there's no need for anyone to buy it or subscribe to the journal because it gets trained and it's already out there, or they lose IP, etc. But we've proven, right, a study came out 2 weeks ago that traditional reviewers will always favor and publish those that cite their own works, right, as opposed to those that don't. And so reviewing one's, applications is fraught with subjectivity when it comes to humans because it's based on their experience and they want to feel like the expert. So it would make no sense not to run, one of these proposals through a pro model, right, and just make sure the science is right, it's replicable, right, it once again is going to not have already been done and will add to the field, etc. And then with that objective information, right, you then take your expertise and make your recommendation, right? But to get that, I mean, how many hours in the day do you have, right? So to do all of what I just said with one run through Pro is going to take you 3 hours, right, to track everything down in different databases. And so it's not efficient. It doesn't lead to a better outcome, right? It's not more efficacious. It's not more accurate. So the question really needs to be dug down beneath that. What is the real reason why we're saying we can't use it? Is it a fear of losing copyright? Is it institutional control? Is it a fear of the authors or those that may be losing control of their creation of their product? Or is it because you're supposed to be, and this hits upon, I love that you brought this up, Tracy, the most kind of hypocritical thing I've seen in publishing is that we don't care if something is good. We care if, in many instances, what other people like us think about it, right? Kind of massaging our egos, etc. That's why it's peer review, right? So what do other people in my field think about this? Not that it's good, not that it's valuable, right? In the same way, as far as weighted in this way, it's what do they think about it? I've seen this actually in feedback, especially in the humanities and social sciences. It's about in like art history, which I'm in. So I want to know what another human thought about this, right? I don't care, right, if it's correct or it's good, etc. I want to know how they felt about it, right? So make me feel, validated as a researcher and scholar with my knowledge. So, so there is a distinction there, right? Are we actually trying to improve the research, or are we actually feeding and upholding this kind of outdated academic model of experts, right, validating one another?
There's also one more thing, which is just a gut level default. It's just better if humans do it. Like we just I want to watch something that was made by a human. I want to read something that was made by a human. I want to know that a human evaluated something. And we're just questioning whether that should be the default. And I think we need to open it up and keep testing and asking, like, where do we see that actually the AI does produce things that are really valuable? We already have examples of places where we see the AI doesn't. And so we need to be honest about that and work on clarifying how that works. And yeah, but it's that gut level, like, I just want to make sure it's human that we're wanting to push back on.
Thank you very much.
Dora, did you want to add something there?
Yes, yes. And again, I came back late and you may have already addressed it, but is this idea of, transparency that you are trying to, argue against, influenced at all by the fact that there is quite a bit of inequality in products, that not everybody has the capacity to use the Pro version or the Plus version, and I mean that does it change anything, the ethics of this discussion?
Well, if you want the ethics, let's talk about the lack of representation of women and those outside of the Western world in scientific journals, right? So you look at the research, and you're automatically handicapped, right, because of your name. Even your name on a journal, right, can lead to higher or lower acceptance rates. And so, as far as transparency is concerned, this kind of what we've shown that the review process and how things move through the system is inherently biased anyway, right? So how does this make it better, right? By requiring transparency and disclosure. But Dr. Plate was going to say something.
Was I? I mean, it is quite interesting to ask whether, I don't know. So I understand, if I'm taking your question correctly, there is some worry about, will eventually just the people who can pay for the best AI be the ones who get things produced, get things right? And that is a concern. I mean, in education, it's a serious concern. What if I have students who can only pay for the $20 thing, and then I have other students who can pay for the $200 thing, and they produce better work? Should they get A's and the other people get B's or C's? So that does have to be figured out. Like, it is an important question, but I don't think we solve that question at the disclosure. I don't think we solve it by saying everyone has to disclose exactly how they made something. I think we have to ask, like, to what extent do we provide subscription support for students, or some kind of subsidized process?
Yeah,
it's really a separate question.
It's the digital divide, right, question that we have there, that being, should, broadband or high-speed internet just be a public service or utility, right, in this way, because you can't live without it, right? Literally, you can't. And so this exacerbates that. You're right. That's why the entire country, the United Arab Emirates, has GPT Plus, right? That's why the entire school system in California, it has the Plus version free for all students, right, or paid for all students, etc. So because this is a necessary skill and tool that employers expect, right, our students to use when they go out effectively and efficiently in order to be more, productive, then that is a real concern. That being, how do you show them how to use the tools without letting them use the tools?
We have another question in the chat from Sarah. I'm going to read out Sarah's question. When it comes to books, do you feel that most readers care about the story more than they care about whether it was written by a human? At the moment, my understanding is that this is more important and that they want the verification. Building on that, is the quality of the writing and the writing itself or the idea that matters. In other words, if someone with an idea who can't write uses AI, does that have the same value as someone whose life is dedicated to the art of writing?
I can answer that from a creative writing perspective because I can tell you flat out, in almost every case, what my students want to know is whether it was written by an AI or not. Like they want to know it was written by a human. And if they read something and it moves them to tears, and then I tell them, well, actually that was written by an AI, they feel deceived, or they feel like, so I think obviously I think there's a problem with that. Like, I think there's some kind of bias that needs to be poked, questioned, but it is a clear bias. I think if I watch lots of just YouTube stuff about this and social media stuff just to get a feel for what the common response is, and over people will say, the reason I go to read something is because I want to connect with another human.
There is an assumption
that is
there.
a strong counter objection, but as for quality, I don't think there is any sense that you can reliably say that a human produces higher level quality than an AI, or that we can even tell. I don't think we can tell anymore. I think people overestimate their ability to tell whether something was made with AI.
But there is an assumption, that very question, and it assumes that all writing is the same and the purpose for all writing is the same, and it's not. And this is really what needs to be foregrounded, right? There is writing for pleasure and for entertainment purposes, and because you want to connect, say, with another human being, like what Dr. Plate was talking about. And there's writing for information, right? So getting information out there, which is, for instance, you mentioned, academics being great writers. Most of those in the sciences are not great writers. That's why they went into the sciences. And so without these tools, they can't publish their work. They can't move up the line as far as tenure. They can't get their ideas out there, right? But in that case, the point of the writing is to communicate the information, the scientific discoveries, right? The factual information, not how you feel about moving through a given narrative or story. So I would say that it certainly is true that humans care much more when they're looking to see how another human felt, right? As opposed to learning something new from an academic standpoint.
Now, I'll just say, I do, in my creative writing sort of background, I come out of experimental, like avant-garde poetry, and there in the 20th century, at least, it was just, the concern was much more about like what kinds of interesting linguistic effects can we create, regardless of what the tool is. And so in the 20th century, there was a pushback that the only reason to go to art is to connect with another human. So that's a kind of aesthetic argument. Like, it's an aesthetic claim, and I could imagine a future where you have what we've already seen, where some authors have some kind of badge or some kind of certificate or something where they say, I only do human work, and then try to market their work for people who want to make sure they human only. Human only sounds just vaguely ominous to me, but that's just almost where we come from. But yeah.
Are there any other questions for the authors? Well, with that, I hesitate to leave just in case someone thinks of a question right as we finish. But with that, I would just like to thank you both for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. You can read the book in the chat. We have the link there to the bookstore, and I look forward to continuing this discussion as we move forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all. Have a nice morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.